Welcome to Live Well, Dream Big. I'm Suzanne Monroe, founder of the International Association of Wellness Professionals, where I've been teaching people how to live a life of wellness, tap into their passion, and go for their dreams for over 15 years. I believe living well and dreaming big starts with ourselves. This podcast will show you how to create a healthy, holistic life, empower your mindset, follow your dreams, and make a big impact. Let's dive in right now. Welcome to Live Well, Dream Big. I'm excited to be back with you today. Our topic today is visibility and vulnerability in a virtual world. And I don't know about you, but it seems like people share just about everything these days on social media. And vulnerability is such a hot topic too. So the question is, how do we show up, be our most authentic selves, be vulnerable and visible without going too far and suddenly having that feeling of regret or remorse? I mean, is there such thing as too much sharing, oversharing? Is there a limit? These are some of the questions I get asked by people in our community. And that's why I'm talking about it today with IAWP Master Wellness Coach Laura Albers. We're going to dive into this hot topic of visibility and vulnerability. And I think you're going to enjoy today's conversation. So let's dive in. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be talking with you today about visibility and vulnerability in a virtual world. And we're going to be giving you some tools that you can start using right away to really step into more visibility and vulnerability. I'm joined today with IAWP Master Holistic Wellness Coach Laura Albers. Laura is also a mental health therapist, the founder of Albers Mind and Body Wellness. Hey, Laura.
Hi, good to be here.
Good to be here with you. Welcome. Laura, I'm really glad we're having this chat today because I know visibility and vulnerability, these are like hot topics, especially today in the age of social media. It seems like people pretty much share everything. So we're going to talk a little bit about that because it is a common question that comes up, especially in our community, like how much to share, like you want to be vulnerable, you want to be authentic. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I think trying to figure out how to show up and then also what to say and not to say, especially in a virtual world, but also maybe even in our personal relationships, it applies even to our most intimate relationships. You know, these are things that we're actually experiencing on a daily basis. So I'm really glad we're talking about this today.
Yes, excited to dive in.
Yeah. Well, let's dive in. You guys know me. I always love to, whenever possible, start out with a definition of what we're covering. And so I looked up visibility, and the actual definition of visibility, I think on dictionary.com, is the state of being able to see or be seen. Okay, makes sense. But I also find it kind of interesting because if you think about what visibility means to you, and you think about this in a bigger way, to me, it's about seeing yourself as who you want to be and who you're becoming, and then allowing that to come through to others, right? And I think that's why the journey can be so hard because we're on the journey as we're doing it. And we can't really be seen until we first truly see ourselves, right? And then we allow ourselves to be seen. So what it comes down to, I think, is visibility is all about showing up authentically and powerfully as yourself, first and foremost, and then really allowing that to shine through. So we'll talk more about that. And we're going to cover 3 steps today to support you on this journey of visibility and vulnerability. And I'm going to dive into the first step right now. The first step is to determine your visibility why. Okay. We talk a lot about finding your why in our community. Like you guys have heard this before, probably. It also applies not just to like your why, like your purpose, maybe your purpose in life or your passion or your why around some topic or your why about why you want to become a coach, if that's you. It also applies to here, your visibility why you would even want to be visible, right? Because you might be thinking, well, I don't want to be visible at all. On the other hand, before you run out there and try to be visible with everyone and really in every place, including all over social media, let's just pause for a minute and talk about why you might even want to be visible. Because I think if you don't define why you want to be visible, if you don't have that why behind it, you end up feeling even more vulnerable. Okay. And yes, we want to be vulnerable in a sense, right? We want to be able to share who we really are. But at the same time, we got to take baby steps because we also want to be protective of ourselves as we figure out how vulnerability works for us. So there's really this balance, and we're going to talk about that today. I think this is really important because in our community, especially, we have a lot of empaths, highly sensitive people. And I mean this in the best of ways, right? Many of us on this path of living well and dreaming big, our listeners, our IAWP holistic wellness coaches, are very intuitive people. or you're on the path to empowering others by understanding your own self better, knowing how you think and act and even feel in the world. And so, and really the truth is we're all emotional beings, right? It's just whether or not you're really in touch with that part of yourself. But if you are, you can feel a lot of emotions around being visible. And again, it can feel vulnerable. Like you might worry about, okay, what are people going to think or what are they going to say? And are you going to be impacted by it? Because those are all things going through your head and you're somebody who takes things to heart, right? So that's why I do think it's really important to determine your why, because you want to be visible before you go out and just do it. Then you can come back to your why. You know that while it might have been hard to be visible or it felt vulnerable or not everybody loved what you shared or it didn't go exactly how you planned, it's all okay because it was part of the plan. It's part of the why. It's part of the purpose, right? But if you don't have that, then it's like, oh, should I have done that? Right? So the why really serves a greater purpose on your journey to sharing. And so again, why do you want to be visible? I mean, it might be that you want to empower others through your own personal journey, right? Or maybe it's to feel more in touch just with your true self and be more authentic in the world. For me, that was a really big reason on my visibility journey. I had parts of me that I would share with certain people over here, and then other parts of me I would allow others to see, right? And the truth is, I didn't feel completely authentic, right? I kind of had like my coaching self, my family self, my business self, whatever, right? These were just kind of these gaps. I didn't feel fully integrated. Now, some of you may have heard this story before. It actually got so bad for me not having this integration about visibility, really. And I ended up developing a rash on my face. And I went to dermatologists and doctors and natural, traditional, everything across the board. And this went on for months and nothing anybody prescribed would make it go away. And one day, I was just fed up and I just stopped. And I'm like, forget all this. I went inward and I got really quiet with myself. And I asked this question, okay, what is this here to teach me? Right. And I suddenly saw in this moment that it really was all about my own visibility. I was blocking my visibility. I wasn't showing up fully as myself, hence the face, right? And I'll tell you, as soon as I got that lesson, the next day the rash disappeared. It was shocking to me, but I knew it at such a deep level that it made this internal and physical shift. And I don't have tons of moments like that. I know a lot of people in our community do. Something has happened on your healing journey that's like, whoa, it's like something big like that. That to me was actually pretty big. I was shocking. And it really did kind of open my eyes up even further to the possibility of there's so many levels, right, to healing. But I knew I wanted to be more visible to truly have more freedom in my expression and not be worried, about who I was saying what to who, where, what, or whatever. And I had to really come to terms with that. Now, have I totally mastered this? No. Visibility and vulnerability, I think, is truly a journey. I think I've come a long way, but I was really willing back then to look at my why. And I'm able to come back to that over the years. And I think this plays out in so many different ways in not just in what we're doing in the world, but in our personal relationships, our larger communities, social media, as we said. So Laura, I know I wanted to share that story, but I know you're going to help us get a little bit more clarity on visibility, sort of on this first level with ourselves and our relationships, which I think is really important because we have to start with the people in our own lives that we're closest to, really. I think it's a great starting point before we go out there in the world and try to be vulnerable. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Oh, absolutely. Well, there's so much goodness in what you shared in that personal story about how the visibility came up for you. So I'm really glad to have heard that. And it's just a great reminder of the importance of all of this and the impact it can have. So, so I think it's interesting because with personal and, sort of our intimate relationships, it's like there's such a wide spectrum. So, some of us have no problem giving our honest opinion. And speaking up when we're upset or sharing our deepest, darkest secrets and feelings. But for others of us, that can feel really scary, or it can feel too intimate or raw or vulnerable, as you kind of said earlier. And so I think it's really important to do a self-check, to check in on this for yourself. For me personally, I know I tend to fall more into the second camp, where it's harder for me to let go of putting up this and I definitely use quotes here, perfect exterior, and really let my walls down and show my imperfections. So I know I think it's good to do sort of that self-check. Yeah, I'd love to talk through a few kind of specific tips, for those of us who like being vulnerable is a bit harder. And the first one is really to slow down and to start slow and with somebody that maybe you already trust. So instead of going from, maybe sharing very little about yourself to this other extreme of like oversharing on social media, start instead with sharing maybe with one person, or a small trusted group of close friends or family members, and just see how that feels to start opening up. And I know for me personally, like when I've done that, it definitely felt scary at first. So if this is you and you can resonate and you want to do this, just know you might feel some nerves or some rawness or vulnerability in doing that. But I can just tell you, I've personally felt so much better afterwards, and felt such a deeper, more intimate connection as a result. So it was definitely worth the bit of uncomfortableness, and it gets easier as you go. So I think that's kind of the first thing.
I love that, Laura. It's like start with people you trust because it really does. It kind of creates this foundation. You're like, okay, I tried this, got some feedback. It feels more comfortable. Like, what can I do next? So I love that.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then talking of that, like, what can I do next? It's like you may have to start first. So, if you're in, like, let's say you want a deeper connection with those around you, maybe it's your spouse, your partner, or, a close friend or another family member. Just remember that you might have to start first and sort of model that for the other person. Because often once you share, it's kind of human nature, generally speaking, that once someone else has sort of shared something kind of, personal or intimate, we tend to want to reciprocate, right? Like we tend to want to, share something else about us then. So it kind of gives, like by us doing that, it gives other people permission to also be, authentic or vulnerable or imperfect, visible, all of those things. So I think that can be a really good thing, but sometimes we have to be the one to start.
Mm,
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, and then the last thing I think I'll say under more of this personal relationships vulnerability piece is really to, if you can, to say ahead of time what you're doing and what you need. So, and this kind of just goes down to like a communication issue. Like often the communication breakdowns that we have is because we weren't really clear from the beginning, like what our intentions were or what we needed from the other person. So it's like if you want to have a deeper, more intimate relationship, or there's something specific that you want to share with someone, but you're feeling maybe anxious about it or just really unsure how they're going to react, let them know that up front. You could just say something like, I've been doing some thinking and I wanted to share something with you that's not really easy for me to talk about, but I trust you. And I think that part's important too, but I trust you. And what I really need from you is just to tell me everything's going to be okay. Or what I need from you is just a hug or for you to just kind of put your arm around me. Or what I need from you is just to listen and not try to fix it or solve it for me. So, obviously we need different things, probably in different situations and with different people. But as much as you're able to kind of identify what is it that you need ahead of time and be upfront about that and ask for it ahead of time, you're at least much more likely to get those needs met. And I just think about, visibility is really being a skill because it absolutely is. It's a skill you're learning and you're continuing to practice. And it does get easier. As you kind of said at the beginning, Suzanne, it's a journey. And I think it's a journey that we're all on and sort of striving towards.
Well, I love what you shared. I mean, this idea of modeling first, just doing it, starting first, but then also, hey, sharing what's going on for you, what you need kind of ahead of time, right? This is like practicing it for yourself, modeling it for others, but really like doing it on this first level is huge because if you want to do it on another level, you've got to be able to kind of to try it out for yourself, really is what I hear you saying and be willing to even do some of this thinking ahead of time like okay, what's going on for me right now and what do I really need right now versus just putting it all out there, which isn't necessarily always bad either, but knowing what you need from it I think is helpful because then whatever you do share that's vulnerable, I think you can feel more supported.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes that might take, some inward reflection. It might even take, journaling or just trying to kind of get at that deeper level of what do you need? Because we don't always know in the moment, especially if we're kind of overwhelmed or we're stressed out or we're stuck in that fear around, visibility or vulnerability. Sometimes we don't always know. So it can be helpful to kind of check in with yourself first before maybe having that conversation.
Yeah. And the thing that's coming to mind too, as you're saying this, Laura, is like, okay, you're doing this for yourself, but you're modeling it for others. But it's also giving them the opportunity. Like there's going to be a time when someone else is going to be kind of vulnerable to you, sharing something with you, whether it's a coaching client, a family member, a friend, somebody else in your life or professional life. And if you've practiced this, it's almost like you have this radar now where you're like, oh, wow, I can see this person's being vulnerable. Instead of trying to give them advice or fix it, maybe I can say, well, what is it that you need right now? Because you practiced it for yourself. So it's really a two-way street.
I love that. That's such a great point that you can then, because you've modeled it, you can ask those questions and help kind of pull that out, if you will, from the other person that's maybe sharing or being vulnerable with you. Yeah, that's a really great point.
All right, guys. So that was step one, really knowing your visibility, why. And then, as Laura said, starting it out, trying it out, and asking for what you need ahead of time. In step two is start small and safe, which is what Laura's been talking about. And when it comes to being visible in our relationships, whether it's partners, family, friend, coworkers, coaching clients, it really starts with being in conversation, taking that first step, as Laura was saying, because the more we can connect, I think, verbally and share and know we're being heard and listened to, that's where visibility can really feel like a win, because we get that feedback. And if we start small and we have those small conversations, it makes us feel safe, right? And then being visible, even though it can feel vulnerable, right? We're building our visibility and vulnerability muscles in a way, I think, by doing this. And if you find that, okay, you're not visible with anything, right? And you're like, okay, I want to make some changes. I just don't know how. I don't know where to start. I think starting small and safe is really important for you, because it's like trying it out, practicing it, and you gain some confidence and you build from there, right? Instead of, I've seen people do this. They're like, okay, I want to be more vulnerable. And then they go put their entire story out there on social media as their first step, right? Now, maybe you're meant to do that, but let's reel it back in here for a minute. Instead of suddenly posting everything on, your most intimate, vulnerable thoughts on social media, you might want to try sharing some things with a close friend or in a small group setting and really gain some of that traction and see how it feels first, right? And I think, like Laura just shared, being visible with our partners and family members is a great starting point. We gain that confidence, we expand, we get some of those wins. And I think the other part of this is to you connect your why in step one to your who. Okay. So you decide first why you want to be more visible. And let's say maybe it's to have more intimate, authentic relationships with family members. So you start there, see what happens, try it a few times, because oftentimes we want to be more visible because we simply just really want to be true to ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. We spend a lot of time wearing masks and hiding out, people pleasing, as we've talked a lot about, saying what we think others want to hear. And I think, gosh, our poor souls over time are just getting weighed down by all of this, right? Mm-hmm. And we truly want to be free to express ourselves and really be understood. I think that's just part of the human desire. But when you're in touch with your why, things do start to shift, because you're coming from this inner knowing that you're really starting to give a voice to the inner knowing. So it's like that connection. I'll give you guys an example. I had an experience the other day with my son. He's 9 years old, where I was really tired. I was worn out. I was upset about something. I don't even remember what. I was crying. And normally I try to hide and make sure he doesn't see me, right? Because I don't want him to be worried for me. I know this is just my process and I don't want him to get upset. But instead, I didn't try to explain it away. I just told him I needed some time and I would talk with him in a little bit. I went through my process, which some of you have heard me share before. I think crying is very healing. It's a good thing. We shouldn't resist it. And then after, I shared with him what was going on and how I felt. And I shared, how we all have emotions, and it's not about always being happy in every moment. It's about really being ourselves and allowing ourselves to be true to ourselves. And that I was glad I could be myself with him, right? And then what happened was he shared that he had been sad earlier that day. And we were able to talk about that for a little while. And it was a powerful moment, because in that little moment where I was being visible and vulnerable, I inspired him to do it. And I think that's really the power behind your visibility in relationships and in connection with other people. You get to be you, but something magical happens where you inspire others to really show up in the same way too. And it was a huge, it might seem small, but at the time it was kind of like this huge awakening moment, right? Because I allowed him to have that voice for where he was. And had I not, well, I never would have known that about where he had been earlier. So I think it plays out when you're helping other people. It could be family, friends, or if you're a wellness coach, you're helping your coaching clients, or if you're in another career, maybe it's even your coworkers. So it plays out in many different ways. Laura, I know you've got a lot of tips about really how to be visible, like with, on a professional level or with coaching clients. So I'm curious to kind of hear your thoughts about this step.
Yeah, definitely have some tips that I wanted to share. But just before I do, I love that story that you shared about your son. I mean, because it gives our ability to be vulnerable, gives other people, it doesn't matter if we're adults or kids or anywhere in between, gives them the permission often to do the same. So that was such a beautiful story. I know for me too, personally, I would say being a mental health therapist, it's been a journey for me to kind of figure out my professional vulnerability, because as a therapist, the way that I was taught was like, you don't share anything with your clients. But in the coaching world, that's very, very different. I feel like you're really encouraged to kind of share your story, which I'm going to talk a little bit about here in a second. And so I kind of had to find my own like footing. And I still think in parts, am finding my own footing with that, as we all sort of need to. So we all kind of are coming from different experiences or backgrounds that, tie into all of this too. So I think that's important to keep in mind. So I definitely, as far as, talking about vulnerability with others, I think first of all, keep in mind that your clients and prospective clients, if we're talking about wellness coaches here, they want to connect with you and your story. They really want to connect with you and your story. And people are often attracted to brands where they get a sense of that real person and that real journey behind them. So that's something I think important just to keep in mind. And then as far as like some specific tips or sort of ways of doing this, the first tip or strategy I would suggest is really to work on your mindset. So as we talked about in the previous step, you're going to do sort of the self check-in of kind of where am I at on this vulnerability sort of scale, or where am I at in my journey? So part of that, often that work is really working on your own mindset, because being visible can trigger all sorts of, fears, confidence issues, imposter syndrome, feelings of self-doubt, overwhelm. Like I could go on, but I think you get the idea. And so it's just really imperative that you work on your mindset and release your limiting beliefs. So specifically for your fear of visibility, take some time and really explore where this fear comes from. So like some of the questions you can sort of ask yourself is, what is my specific worry or worries? Because for many of us, it comes from not, just wanting to be liked and accepted by others. So that fear really comes from, what if, such as like, what if they don't like what I'm saying? What if I look or sound stupid? What if they don't like me? And so once you've identified your specific worries, then of course you can work to challenge those thoughts. So, one way that you can do this is by, asking, well, what would I tell my best friend if they had the same worries? Or what would I tell, my son or daughter if they had these worries? I certainly wouldn't beat them up and, tell them just to like get over it or whatever. I would try to help them explore that. It can also help to challenge yourself to think of one time when you were visible or vulnerable, and then put yourself out there and it did go well, or at least wasn't as terrible as often we think about it, being in our heads. So that can definitely be something to sort of keep in mind.
I love that. I just want to stop there for a minute, because this whole idea of your mindset, like this really is so much about your own fears, as you're talking about, Laura. It's like, okay, I'm going to say or do something, and then we've got all this other baggage really we're carrying around that thing, right? And sometimes, whatever, if we're going to share something with someone, like we're worried about what they're going to think, all the things that are going on, like may never even happen, right? But we have to kind of do that self-analysis and do some of that inner work to see where those fears are coming from and really what it's all about for us, right? Because that really, I think, Laura, as you talk about this, that really makes the whole point of the vulnerability journey, right? Like if we don't make that connection to like why we're doing it and what's coming up for us, then like there's really no point in many ways, I think. So I love that you shared that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah. And I think it's also important, another sort of tip around this is to really focus on being of service. And really, when you shift from making it about you and your fears or your concerns or your imperfections, you're really coming from a lack standpoint. And that naturally kind of has walls up. But when you can focus instead on the message and the value that you're providing and really just being of service to others, it really puts the focus where it needs to be, which is on the client or just on others. And so that takes the focus off of you and can really free you up to do what you do best, which is, if we're talking about wellness coaches, like it's to reach out and offer valuable solutions, to help to help people, using your particular skills and strengths. So really that focus of being of service allows us to come out of our head and into more of the present moment and be able to share our skills and our talents. Yeah. And then I think the last thing I'd share around that is really just doing one thing each week that stretches you and gets you out of your comfort zone. Because as we've talked about in this call, already so far today, Suzanne, it's like, we know that it may not always feel really comfortable, especially in the beginning with being vulnerable or more visible. But as we talked about, it does get easier over time, the more you practice it, it being a skill. And so what I would encourage to maybe, and this might pair well with your with your step around identifying your visibility why, which is to really set some visibility targets or some visibility goals. So you can set some of these visibility targets. It might be for those that are in the coaching world, it might be, or that maybe run your own business, it might be going to a networking event, or it might be doing a Facebook Live, or sending an email to your mailing list, or posting in a LinkedIn group or on Facebook. So whatever the case may be, think about what that could mean for you. Maybe brainstorm some ideas of what are some ways that I could be more visible or vulnerable in my life. And then sort of bonus points here, schedule those in your calendar if it's something specific, or even share your plans, because it can make a huge difference if you sort of like, quote, go public with your plans rather than keeping it to yourself. That way you've got kind of the accountability, which a lot of us, need. And you've got people cheering you on and sort of motivating you and looking for you to be that role model.
I love it. I love it. It's, you do the inner stuff, but then you kind of like, okay, I look at the fears, I look at it, but then I kind of move on and I'm like, okay, why am I actually doing this? How can I serve others? And then I'm stretching myself. So it's a great little process that you've outlined, Laura. It totally makes sense. And one of the things that's coming through is like, okay, becoming a coach really is the biggest visibility, vulnerability journey you're going to go on, right? If you're willing to embrace it, right? And so you have to really, because if you think about it, if someone's going to be connecting with you to work with you one-on-one, they want to know who you are. You can't be like not hiding behind your computer all day or not doing anything, right? So you have to be visible in order to connect, right? But sometimes being visible for people feels like marketing or feels like sales. And like, then we get covered in all that kind of stuff, right? So really, I think it does come back to that visibility why, because if you're like, hey, I'm really meant to coach and support people. And as a part of that, I have to be visible versus all I do is I love coaching, but I don't want to do any of this. There's going to be a disconnect. Right. And so we've got to step into that visibility. But if we know it's about our why, ultimately we're here to help people. I think it can help a little bit on that journey, especially in the beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think people just connect with that vulnerability and authenticity and things like that. So even for those of you, and I can relate to this too, of being maybe highly sensitive or an introvert or whatever, and think, well, I can't really do this. It's like, oh my gosh, absolutely you can. And people will find it probably even more inspiring because they're going to connect and relate to it. So yeah, I think this is such a great topic. I'm really glad that we're talking about today.
I think it brings us to step 3, which is really about as you're stepping out into the world, whether it's in your coaching practice or in your business or your career, and you're really sharing your message. You're it's more than just the personal level. Step 3 is heal, then help. Okay. And this is really most true when we talk about being visible, I think on this third level of in our professional lives, in our business career, because certainly sharing with others can be healing. But when we step into the role of helping others or sharing ourselves on a bigger scale, I think it's really good to check in with our intentions and also where you are on your own healing journey with what you're about to share. So you want to come back to that visibility why, and then maybe go a little bit deeper. And the reason I say this is because I think the hardest part to being visible, again, is that we also have to be vulnerable. And with vulnerability being a hot topic these days, I do often get this question, how vulnerable should I be? How much should I share? I'm trying to put myself out there, but where's the limit here? Is there one? And this is why I say heal, then help. And I'm talking about you healing yourself, then helping others. And it doesn't mean you have to be completely healed on your journey with whatever you're working on in order to help people. What I'm saying is you really want to be able to check in on how you've really healed around the subject or topic you want to share. And the reason this is important with vulnerability is because you're going to feel more vulnerable if you haven't fully healed. A good marker is to consider whether or not you're going to be hurt or impacted mentally or emotionally by any negative response to what you put out there when you try to be more visible and vulnerable. Let me say that again. Will you be hurt or emotionally impacted by any negative responses you get to what you're sharing? Because if the answer is yes, a part of you, just know, a part of you is still healing that vulnerable part, and that's totally fine. But you have to ask yourself if you're ready for tons of acquaintances or strangers to weigh in and not support what you say, right? Because sometimes we want to be vulnerable to get the support, which we're also looking for more on our healing journey, or we're putting it out there and we're going to be impacted by what we experience. And that can be almost damaging in a way if you're in your healing process. Okay. So I think that's an important marker. On the flip side, it can feel really good to have those uplifting comments from other people. But again, are you sharing is it a benefit for yourself technically? Are you doing it to help heal yourself on the journey, or is it some benefit for your community or audience? And I think that's important to think about. There's no exact line, there is no exact right answer, but I think that can support you in seeing where you are. So we want to be vulnerable, but we also want to check in with where we are on the journey, right? And if you think your story or what you have to share can benefit someone else and you've healed it enough to the point where, again, you're back to your why, you feel empowered by your story, right? You're not looking for approval. It doesn't matter what negative feedback you're going to get then, because you feel on purpose, you know your why, you know it's going to resonate with the people it's meant to help. It's going to resonate with your tribe or the people who need to hear it, right? Then it makes sense. Yeah, there might be naysayers out there or comments that don't resonate, but because you're connected to your why, because you're not totally in the middle of your healing journey looking for someone to help you in that process, it matters. It really helps to see, okay, it makes more sense to move forward, I think. So I would take that into account. And I think some of us might be on the other side of the spectrum where you don't want to share anything, right? You're not like worried about how much am I going to share? You're like, am I going to share it all? Right. So your marker is more about leaning into some vulnerability. Like, what is something you could share about yourself to inspire or support others? Because I think the more honest, authentic, and true we can be to ourselves, the more it's going to resonate with others, as we've been talking about, right? The more people are going to resonate, attract to it. And that's whether it's in the coaching world or in really other aspects of any career or field where you're sharing a message, helping people. So there is a balance there. And I did want to talk about that delicate balance today, because it is the one thing I do see people getting tripped up with. You go from not having been vulnerable at all to suddenly dumping it all out in one place. And it's just too extreme for you, too much, and really too much for the audience, really. Mm-hmm. The people, they're like, wow, you haven't really shared anything. And now you put it all out there. Like, it can be too much for the readers too, right? So I think it does come back to those baby steps. You want to feel safe and you want to keep checking in on your why. So that's kind of my thinking about this: heal, then help, right? And again, it's not like, you're totally healed, you can't share anything. No, you want to be vulnerable, you want to be authentic, but you also have to look in at why you're doing it. And that's, I think, an important marker.
Oh, I love that. That is such, an important marker, such a great distinction, such a good question that people can ask themselves, is if they'll be heard or openly kind of impacted by what they share. And if so, then that's just an opportunity to kind of continue on your own healing journey. And yeah, I love that. That's great.
Well, what are your thoughts, Laura? Because I know, especially when you kind of think about just being more visible out there in the world, like even with your business and stuff like that, like it brings up a lot of stuff around, okay, like I have to appear a certain way or I have to be perfect. And I know you have a lot to share on that too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, and I will just say, and I kind of shared this a little bit in the previous step, but I mean, this has been such a journey for me. personally, because I have been so closed off kind of in that with that boundary. I'm talking primarily professionally, but often those go hand in hand. And probably for most of you on the call or those listening can attest to that. It kind of goes hand in hand. But just finding your journey of what do you want to share? Is it helpful for your audience, if you will? Is it helpful for you? Just kind of asking those questions. So again, I'm just really glad that we're talking about this. And I personally am always so inspired when I see somebody else sharing something about themselves and being visible and vulnerable, because it gives me sort of that added like inspiration and support that I need to kind of do that as well. So yeah, I'd love to, do you want to talk about some tips? I can share a few tips around this.
Yeah, I'd love to hear kind of what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, well, I think because so much of visibility is tied into perfectionism, right? Like we have this idea in our mind of how, how the sharing is going to go on social media, like what kind of comments we're going to get back, or how the video that we're recording is going to go or something. So we just have a lot of perfectionism tied around visibility. And so I think really one of the first tips I'd share is just to really adopt sort of this B plus effort. Another way of sort of saying this is like done is better than perfect, but it's truly this idea that a B plus effort is usually more than good enough, usually more than sufficient. So for most tasks, let's say, for right now, we're kind of focusing maybe on your business or your career. But for most tasks, like let's say creating a video or giving a workshop or being interviewed on a podcast, like a B plus is good enough. So if you flub a few words or something like that, it's not the end of the world, because people truly want to see that you're a real person, right? And real people sometimes flub their words. I'm pretty sure I've probably done that on this call already. So if not, I probably will. But you don't have to be perfect all the time. And in fact, I feel like the more pressure you put on yourself to be or look or sound perfect or say just the right perfect thing, the more likely you're going to stay stuck. You're
Mm-hmm.
going to feel frustrated. You're going to be invisible. So, give tasks your best effort, of course, but recognize what needs more of an A or possibly an A plus effort, and really where a B plus effort is good enough. And again, I'll say it again, like that done is better than perfect. So really adopting that mindset.
B plus effort. I love it.
That's the takeaway from today. Adopt a B plus effort.
Even a C plus is pretty good.
Well, exactly. Why stop at a B?
Yeah.
Exactly. I also want to share this tip too. So this is more of like, I guess, sort of a strategy, particularly maybe a marketing strategy around visibility, which is OPA, which I love kind of sharing this idea of OPA, which OPA stands for other people's audiences. And so there's really no need to totally recreate the wheel and start your audience, your followers, your raving fans from scratch. Okay. So this is especially true when you're just starting out. So let's say that you're, a wellness coach and you'd like to do a workshop. Well, of course, a great way to promote it is to send it to other colleagues or professionals that who can help promote your event or pass along your flyer, or send it, an email blast to their audience or post it on their social media. So just really getting in front of other people's kind of already ready-made audiences is a great way to gain, visibility and all of that. So I think some other ways to gain visibility with OPA is, maybe pitching yourself for podcasts or to guest blog on somebody else's blog or website. Just really the more connections and networking you can do with professionals, and also, working with your niche, but like you want to work with professionals who work with your niche, but kind of in a little bit different way, or who are also maybe in the wellness field. That's even better. So for those of you who are IWP coaches in training, you have a lot of tools and resources in the classroom about how to network and pitch yourself. So, definitely be sure to check that out. But that may or may not be too big of a stretch. So I want you to, as we've been talking about throughout our time together today, is to really check in on your own visibility levels and what would be a step forward for you personally. If pitching yourself for a podcast is way, it's way on that extreme, that's totally okay. You don't have to start there. As Suzanne, I know you talked about in a previous step, like, start small and safe, right? So figure out what that one next step is for you that you can connect perhaps with other people's audiences. So you're not having to really do all of that work yourself, and you can be more visible with OPA. So I'd be
Yeah, and
curious
that
to hear
makes,
your thoughts.
yeah, I mean, that makes total sense, right? Because some of us are at a stage you're just starting out with visibility, right? So like, okay, start small. It's definitely, maybe it needs to be with people in your personal life, right? Others are like, okay, I'm going to stretch a little bit further, talking to maybe my network or coaches in my community, or my clients or coworkers or whatever. And then there's kind of this third layer that we're talking about now. Is like, okay, you're going to the next level, you're sharing your message, you've been practicing visibility and vulnerability, and now you're like, okay, now what? How do I tie this into the work that I'm doing in the world, is what I hear you saying, Laura. And what I love about what you shared with Opa and other people's audiences is that it gets you in the game of practicing earlier. So instead of saying, "Oh, I've got to build up my tribe, and it's going to take me forever, and I'm going to do all this stuff before I go over here and speak to other audiences," for example, that might take you a long time. Versus if you say, "Hey, I go over here first, I get to start practicing visibility now. My message is not perfect. What? Maybe I don't even know my niche. I thought I did, and it's changed, or what is it the heck I'm talking about now, right?" But if you wait till, it kind of ties into everything you're saying. If you wait till it's totally perfect, like that's the same thing here with other people's audiences, versus if you just get out there and start sharing your message and doing the B plus or C plus effort, you're going to learn so much. And that visibility piece is going to be easier because you're literally practicing it. Which reminds me of a different episode, Laura, where you and I have talked about, like, practicing stuff before being perfect. Like, this really, think of your visibility journey as practicing, right? You might go out there and share something on social media and feel like, oops, that was maybe too much. But guess what? You don't have to beat yourself up over that either. Like, you tried it and maybe it was too much for you. Like, you don't know until you practice and try. So don't beat yourself up on the journey. It is truly about taking the small steps, but just keep moving forward and seeing what feels right to you. On another point, you might see other people out there in your same field and they're sharing more, doing something. Everyone's at a different place, right? It might not feel comfortable for you. It might feel comfortable for you. Like, you have to check in and see where you are. And you can only do that by taking those small practice steps and being like, okay, how did that feel? Can I go a little further? Oh no, I'm going back here for a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so true. And if you see somebody on social media or through their website or an article they've written or video they've created or what have you, and you really like resonated with the message and really liked kind of their like visibility or vulnerability, like take note of that. That may be something to sort of work towards, or maybe like that is a mirror to you to say, oh, I could probably do something similar. Again, you want to make sure it fits and really goes back to some of those questions that you mentioned earlier, Suzanne, like, would I be hurt or openly impacted if I shared this, or is this helpful for my particular audience? Because all audiences, of course, are really different. But it's definitely something to sort of strive towards. So if it's helpful, like, so it doesn't get into a comparison game, because that's what I don't want. But if it's helpful to kind of have, as we've talked about, like a visibility why and a visibility target, if you have sort of a visibility mentor or someone that you kind of look to where you're like, I really like their style in kind of what they share or how they share, doesn't mean, of course, you have to do it exactly the same, but it might be that you start sort of collecting some ideas or some visibility mentors that can kind of help you along this journey as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great idea. Looking for those examples and then checking in with yourself and seeing, okay, where does that land for me, really? We have covered so much juiciness so far, Laura. I want to turn now to our talk back session with our coaches who are out there joining us live, and hear from you guys today. What's coming up for you around visibility and vulnerability in a virtual world or not? And it'd be fun to hear what you guys have. So, hi, Heather.
Hello. Oh, I guess this was so timely because I did my second ever video today, which was huge for me. And yes, so I thought that was a big step for me. And yes, so I'm really pleased that I did it. And I think the timing of the session tonight is great. So I appreciate all the tips. And I just wanted to share that.
Well, that's awesome, Heather. Let me ask you this for those who haven't maybe done a video yet and they want to, but they're feeling afraid, like you did your second one. Like, what was it like for you? Were you like, okay, how did you get to doing it?
Okay, so the first one I did is the success story, which I think you might have seen. It was a moment where I had 2 practice clients, and I had the testimonials from them this week, and I met both of them this morning, and they gave me this breakfast collection and flowers. And I just thought, I just want to share this with someone, and it would be a good opportunity for me to be visible. So my why was to express how pleased I was for the feedback from the practice clients, but also to be visible, because that's my big learning curve. So that's it. And with my first video last week, it took me about 3 hours to work out how to use YouTube and how to upload.
And now you know.
Yes.
That's
so yes,
awesome.
I repeated the process today. So
Yes.
I've gone through a steep learning curve, and I felt very pleased to have made that progression, to have taken that step. So I just wanted to share that.
Love that. I'm just curious, Heather, did it get a little bit easier the second time as opposed to the first time?
Yes.
Awesome.
Because the first one was on Sunday and this is Wednesday. So just setting up the tripod.
Yeah.
It was all learning. So I'm pleased that I did the second one today. It just seemed a perfect moment to have a go. And that's what I did.
And I love too that it's getting easier, and it will continue to get a little easier every time. That's awesome.
Thank you. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thanks, Heather, for sharing. And also, Heather, as you shared that, I think another thing that kind of comes to mind is that you had this moment of like, you had this inspiration. The way you described it, you're like, I just felt inspired and I wanted to share it, right? And we get these little hits of inspiration. And that's like, I don't take that for granted. There's something there, right? Like that's a moment, like maybe you are meant to share, right? Like check in, like those are like little things and they come and go. Like they're not always there. When you feel that wave of inspiration, like ride that wave, see where it's going to take you. I love that you did that, because if you don't take action on the inspiration, what happens is ultimately, time goes on, it passes, right? And you're like, oh, I'm not going to do that video, or I'm not going to say that or do that, right? So when you have that inspiration, it's a great time to kind of like stop and be like, okay, how can I act on this if it's a good fit? So I love that you did that.
Yeah. And how proud and excited you feel as a result of being willing to be a little visible and vulnerable. So
yeah, that's awesome. Let's go over to Carolina.
Yes. Hi.
Hi, Carolina. How are you?
Yes, you're pronouncing that correctly.
Oh,
yes, good. And I have to say that Heather's my inspiration right now. I struggle with my mindset and perfection. And with my videos, I've been procrastinating posting it. And I'm talking specifically about the first one I've done, and I have it completed. It's about what does wellness 360 mean to me. And I've tried it several times, became self-conscious. So it's just kind of sitting there, not posting. So due to this workshop, I'm motivated to post it, and I'm inspired by Heather and everything that I've learned and heard. So it's really exciting. Even me raising my hand right now, being visible, that's pretty big for me. So yeah, I'm excited.
Oh, I love that you raised your hand. Thanks for doing that. And I think you're right. That is a first step. And that's one of the cool things to keep in mind, you guys, especially inside our holistic wellness coaching community. It's such a place now to practice that visibility and vulnerability and make lots of mistakes too, right? Because many of our listeners of the podcast, you're out there in the world, maybe you're doing different things, right? But one of the cool things for you guys as coaches inside the community, it's like, you get to try this out. You get to practice, right? And the community is here to support you. So you did this today. Now you post your video. You're still in this sort of small, safe space. And so I love that you're going to go ahead and post. We'll look for it out there.
I love that.
Good job.
I wanted to add just something a little bit personal about that too, which is when I first started doing videos for the IWP Ambassador program on YouTube, oh my gosh, I would probably do at least 5 to 8 different recordings, because I'd be like, oh no, I flubbed these words, or oh, my hair looked weird, or what was my face doing? And I was so critical. And this is sort of what I mean by that B+ effort, because once I finally stopped re-recording over and over and over, I generally now just do like one take and I'm like, well, okay, unless it's just like really, really bad. But like, because first of all, the more you do it, the better you get and the more comfortable you feel. But also people are listening to the videos because of the message. They're not listening to the video thinking, oh gosh, she's got a weird kind of hair there. And even if they are, like, I'm never going to know. Like, who cares? So yeah, I just love that you guys are getting out there, getting your videos out there, and being willing to be vulnerable and baby stepping your way there. That's awesome.
That is awesome. Let's go over to, I think, Shayla. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, hi.
How are you?
I'm really good. How are you?
Good. What's going on today?
Lots is happening with the mindset and with, visibility and everything like that. Laura, I loved everything that you were sharing because I have like this weird fear of going live. I do a million takes when it comes to videos. Like the perfectionism just kicks in so bad. But after this, I really do feel inspired to just let go of that perfection and just kind of go for that live video. And, Suzanne, I just want to thank you for being vulnerable and visible with your story about your rash on your face, because I actually, in the last year or so, I had a full body breakout with eczema. And this was completely out of the norm for me. It's never happened to me before. And so you sharing that was, a deeper part of you that was, trying to be seen or trying to be visible, like that really, really resonated with me. I felt like that might be also one of the inner reasons why my entire body broke out. But one of the biggest breakthroughs that I had today was when you were kind of, talking about the why and everything like that, and why you aren't visible or why you don't want to be vulnerable. For me, it came up as I don't want to be seen as too much, or I don't want to be seen as the center of attention, because I was an only child growing up and I was always in the spotlight. So kind of like I want to step out of the spotlight for a bit. But honestly, the more that other people share, the more that I want to share. And it's just a ripple effect. So it's a really beautiful thing.
Well, thank you for sharing so much good stuff there. And thanks for sharing your story as well. I think it's interesting what you said about wanting to not be in the spotlight, right? Because, and that's what's so challenging in the virtual world we're in, because there is a sense that people want to be in the spotlight. We want to be an influencer on Instagram, whatever, right? And I think you're right. As you said, the why piece is so important. So like the obstacle or the mental like roadblock for you is like, oh, it's going to be me, like talking about me being in the spotlight. Right. But if you come back to the why and you're like, oh, that's not really my motive. That's not what I want. What I want is I'm helping my coaching clients or whatever your why is. Right. And you're like, oh, okay, I can do this because it's not about me. But you have to go through that process like you've just done. Otherwise you stay in the spot of, okay, I don't want to be in the spotlight.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. I'm glad you're processing all of this. Good stuff ahead. Thank you. Anybody else out there? Questions, thoughts, anything to share? Hey, Laura.
So Sheila, it's incredible what you've talked about, and Susan, what you mentioned about it's not about ourselves, because I remember Laura, I had a coaching session with you, and you said that to me because I was so scared of being out there, and you said, but it's not about you, it's about the clients that we want to reach out. It's about the people we want to reach out. It's not about ourselves. So the moment you said that, it shifted completely in my mind. And I thought, no, it's not me. It's them. They are important. We are also important. But I mean, the message is for them and not for us. So that really reminded that.
That's awesome. I'm so glad you shared that. And that, you took that kind of as a takeaway. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's helped me tremendously to get out of my own head, because I think we all have those moments. I don't think any of us are immune to that. I have definitely been there. And I feel like if you're growing, you're going to continue to experience, at least at times, these vulnerability. I don't necessarily even want to say challenges, because I think I'd say more opportunities. If you're willing to, if you're growing either in your business, you're growing or personally, you're going to come up to new opportunities to be to share your message, to be possibly vulnerable. So it's a good sign when you experience those. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks for sharing that, Laura. And I think that's such a good reminder, right? We get so caught up in our own heads. It's all about me, right? But then that's where we go to the why. We're like, wait, it's not about me. It's actually about who I want to serve, who I want to support. So yes, it's definitely a journey, but I think keeping that in mind can really help. Mm-hmm. So let's see, anybody else out there?
Hi, Suzanne. Hi, Laura. Well, so much in my head right now, in my heart as well. I just don't know where to start because hearing all the stories, it so resonates with me. And this topic is my biggest block, I would say. I've been working on it quite a lot. Okay. But first thing I would like to share, breakthrough for me today is making visibility about connection. Because I find I don't like it being about me, but I know it has to be about me if I want to connect with people. But focusing on the connection word, that makes all the difference. Then, so that for me, instead of making it about me and being stressed about me showing up, it's like making it about me as a way to connect. And anyway, so it really helped flip things around in my head. So thank you very much. And just want to share that, I just completed my certification yesterday and published, I think must be my third video this morning. And I love the fact that we have the community to where we can share those videos to actually practice, because I made it a purpose this morning to say, okay, no more than 1 hour to get through it, 3 or 4 shots max that I'm going to try, and then just let it go. No perfection, just do it and publish, which I did. And I'm really glad that I did. So thank you for all your support and knowledge and the wonderful tips. I love it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. A big congratulations to you on making it through the journey and also putting yourself out there with the videos. And I love what you said. Visibility equals connection, right? Like, let's just walk away with that. I think that's such a great place to really end for all of us to be like, okay, visibility equals connection. And what's our next little step to connect with those we want to help in the world, and whether it's in our personal lives or on a bigger scale. So thank you for that. And thank you to everybody for joining us. This has been so much fun today, connecting with you guys. I love it so much. And Laura, thanks for being here. This has been a fun conversation, hasn't it?
Oh my gosh, so great. So I've had so many great takeaways myself, and I know we could talk all day, but I guess it's time to wrap.
Next time we'll go out there. We'll see everybody. We'll be out there posting and sharing. And
yes.
Awesome, everybody. We'll see you back here next time. Take care. Till then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Live Well, Dream Big. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and I want to invite you to take your next step toward living well and dreaming big by downloading the Live Well, Dream Big lifestyle book. It's the ultimate guide to becoming your best self and living life on your own terms. You can grab your complimentary copy by going to the link in the show notes or heading directly to iawpwellnesscoach.com/guide. That's iawpwellnesscoach.com/guide.